The sky was dark and full of clouds, winds were strong and cold. Lightning flashed in the sky like angry fire. Far above the clouds, something was falling fast. It was not a plane, it was not a star. It was something else, a metal capsule old damaged. Spinning in the air like it had no control, the capsule fell from the sky and crashed into a junkyard. There was a loud sound like thunder when it hit the ground. Old cars shook, scrap metal moved. Birds flew away in fear, but no one saw it fall, no. One except the old junkyard owner. He was sitting inside his cabin drinking tea. He heard the noise and looked out the window. He saw some smoke in the far corner of the yard. He thought it was just another pile of old junk falling down, so he did not go out. He closed the window and went back to his chair. But something strange was happening inside the capsule. There was a small blue light blinking on its surface. Inside the capsule, a young alien girl was lying still. Her skin was light purple, and her hair was silver like the moon. She was breathing but very weak. Her clothes were torn. Her hands were shaking. She was scared. She opened her eyes slowly and looked around. The glass above her head was cracked. She could see dirty metal and broken machines outside. She tried to move, but her body was hurt. She looked at a small screen inside the capsule. The screen showed some alien letters that said defective, worthless, disposed. She closed her eyes again. She knew what that meant. She had been thrown away like trash by her own people. The night passed slowly. The stars watched her from above. No one came. The world was silent, but the next morning a boy named Jake came to the junkyard. He was a young human around 16 years old. He liked to collect old parts and make small machines. He was kind and smart but lonely. He often came to the junkyard after school. He always looked for something new and interesting. That morning he walked to the back of the junkyard where he had never gone before. He saw smoke coming from behind a big pile of broken cars. He got curious. He climbed over the metal and reached the other side. There he saw something strange. It was a round metal object, half buried in the ground. It was not from Earth. It was not something he had ever seen. Jake slowly walked closer. The capsule was cold and shining. He touched it and felt a strange energy. The blue light blinked again, and then the capsule made a soft sound like a whisper. It started to open. The top of the capsule moved up slowly. Steam came out. Jake stepped back in shock. He could not believe his eyes. Inside the capsule was a girl. Not a normal girl, an alien girl. She was hurt and weak. Her eyes opened and looked at Jake. They both stared at each other without speaking. She tried to sit but fell back. Jake moved forward to help. He held her hand. Her skin felt warm, but different. She did not speak his language, but her eyes spoke fear. She was asking for help, without words. Jake looked around. No one was there. The junkyard was empty and quiet. He decided to help her. He could not leave her here. He took off his jacket and covered her. He whispered, "You are safe now. Don't worry, I will not hurt you." The alien girl did not understand his words, but she felt the kindness in his voice. For the first time since she was thrown away, she felt hope. She gave a small nod and closed her eyes again. Tears rolled down from her eyes. Jake looked at the strange machine. He knew this was big. This was not just a machine. This was something special, something secret. He knew he had to hide her. He looked at the sky. What if someone was watching? What if someone wanted her back? He looked around and quickly planned. He would take her to his home, hide her in his garage, and find out the truth. The capsule light blinked once more. Then it turned red. Somewhere far away in space, a signal was sent. The lost capsule was now active. A message reached a distant ship. They had found her. They were coming. The morning air was soft and cold. Clouds moved slowly in the sky like lazy waves in a quiet ocean. Birds flew above the old junkyard, unaware of what had happened during the night. Beneath the metal piles and broken machines, something had changed. A secret now lived in the junk. A secret not from Earth. Jake walked carefully through the narrow path between old cars and rusted bikes. His heart beat fast, but not with fear. He held the alien girl in his arms and moved as gently as he could. She was not heavy, but she felt fragile, like a lost star fallen to the ground. Her silver hair moved with the wind like threads of light. Her skin glowed very faint, as if her body was fighting to stay awake. Jake reached the back gate and opened it. Without making noise, he pushed his bike with one hand and held her tight with the other. He walked slowly through the empty street. No one saw him, no one stopped him. It was early, people were still sleeping inside their warm homes, but Jake was wide awake, his mind full of questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why was she thrown away? And most of all, why did she look so broken and yet so powerful at the same time? He reached his house. It was small and quiet. His parents were away working in another city for the week. He had the place to himself. He quickly opened the garage and pulled the door shut behind him. He placed the girl on a soft blanket on the floor. She moved slightly and gave a soft sound. Jake sat beside her and looked at her face. Her eyes were closed, but there was pain in her expression. He wanted to speak, to ask if she was okay, but he knew she would not understand. He stood up and searched the drawers for anything that might help. A bottle of water, some clean cloth, an old first aid box. He returned and sat down again. He cleaned the small cut near her forehead. She opened her eyes slowly. Her eyes were deep blue like the ocean before a storm. She looked at him with confusion and fear. Jake smiled gently and spoke in a low voice. You are safe here. I will help you. Don't be afraid. She looked around and tried to sit. Her hands pushed against the blanket, but her strength was not enough. Jake helped her sit up. She looked at her own hands, then at Jake, then at the room. Her lips moved. She said something, but the words were not English. They sounded musical but strange. Jake shook his head. I don't understand you, but it's okay. We'll figure it out. She touched her chest and said one word, Sarah. Jake pointed to himself, Jake. Then he pointed at her, Sarah. She nodded slowly. For the first time she smiled a little. It was weak, but it was real. Time passed slowly in the garage. Sarah tried to stand, but her legs shook. Jake helped her walk a few steps. She pointed at some tools and made shapes in the air. Jake gave her a notebook and pencil. She started drawing strange machines. One looked like a small device with wires. She pointed at the drawing, then at a box in the corner. Jake opened the box and found a few parts that looked similar. They worked together for hours. Jake handed her the tools, and she fixed the wires with shaky hands. She was building something. She was trying to communicate or maybe fix herself. Her fingers moved fast. Even though she looked tired, she was not useless. She was skilled. She was smart. She was not what her people had said. As the day turned to evening, the small device blinked once. A soft light filled the garage. Sarah touched it, and the light moved over her skin like water. Her body shivered. She stood tall, her eyes now calm, her voice stronger. She touched her head, then her chest, then the machine. Then she pointed to the sky. Jake understood a little. She was from far away. She had been hurt. She had been thrown out. But now she was trying to heal, trying to send a message, or maybe trying to remember who she really was. Suddenly, the machine blinked red. Sarah froze. Jake looked at her face. It was full of fear again. She pointed at the door, then covered her head with her arms. Jake moved fast and shut the lights. He whispered, "It's okay. No one is here. You are safe." But far away in the sky above Earth, something moved between the clouds. A dark ship, silent, watching. It had received the signal from the capsule. Now it knew where she was, and it was coming. Sarah held the machine close. Jake stood beside her. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The sun rose slowly over the city. While the air stayed still and quiet, birds sat on wires looking down at the empty streets. People walked to work with sleepy eyes and heavy bags. But in one small garage, something far from normal was happening. Two different lives were sitting together. One from Earth, one from the stars era, sat near the window holding a blanket around her shoulders. Her silver hair caught the morning light like it was made of stars. She looked outside, but her mind was far away. Her eyes were open but filled with silence. Jake placed a cup of warm tea beside her and waited. He did not speak. He only watched. She turned to him and touched the notebook. She opened to a blank page and began to draw, not machines, not tools, but people, strange tall people with armor. And long head symbols above them, stars around them. One of the figures looked like her smaller alone, with a mark on her shoulder. A red circle. She pointed to that one. Then to herself. Jake understood that small figure was her. The red circle was still on her shoulder. He had seen it last night like a birthmark. But glowing. She drew a large building next, tall, shiny, floating above the clouds. She pointed up. Jake guessed her home far away in the sky, or maybe not in the same sky at all. Then she drew something else. A council, 7 figures, all looking at the small one. She drew fire, storms. Tirzara's hands stopped for a moment. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she drew a small device with wires, the same kind she was fixing yesterday. She connected it to the small girl in the picture. She pointed to her head, then to the drawing. Jake leaned closer. She drew a wave like a signal coming out from her mind. Then she drew a screen with the same words he had seen. Inside the capsule, defective, useless, disposed. Jake stared at the page. His throat felt tight. He could feel her pain. They had tested her, scanned her mind, judged her, and thrown her away like broken metal. But why would they send a child away? Why call her defective? Sarah turned the page. This time she drew something different. A symbol, a star broken into 2 halves. Then she drew a crystal glowing, floating between her hands. She looked at Jake and held out her palm. She closed her eyes. Nothing happened at first. Then a faint glow appeared. A soft light moved above her skin, floating in the air like dust in sunlight. It swirled, formed a shape, then faded. Jake stepped back in shock. "You have power, real power," he whispered, even though he knew she could not understand his words. She did not speak English, but she felt his energy. She nodded slowly. She raised her hands again. This time the glow turned blue. A small object on the table lifted into the air. It spun quietly for a second, then dropped. Jake smiled. She smiled back, but then her face changed. Her eyes filled with fear again. She touched her head, then made a cutting motion, then pointed to the notebook. Jake took the pencil and drew a brain. She nodded. Then she drew a lock on it, then a key, then a symbol. Same broken star. They had locked her powers, controlled her mind. And when she started to break free, they called her broken, too dangerous, too different. Jake sat back and looked at her. She was not weak. She was not broken. She was someone special. And they feared her. That was the truth, not because she failed, but because she was stronger than they had planned. Sarah opened a small piece of metal she had taken from the capsule. She placed it on the floor and opened a tiny panel. Inside was a light. She touched it. The room flickered. A small image appeared in the air, like a hologram. Jake saw a city, strange buildings, flying machines, creatures walking in lines, guards watching. Then the image zoomed into a room, a prison, a small figure sitting alone. Jake's heart sank. That was her, locked away, forgotten, thrown like garbage into the cold of space. He looked at her and spoke softly. "Not here. Not again. You are not alone now." She touched his hand, her fingers warm, her eyes full of thanks. No words, just feeling. Outside the garage, a small flying object passed by. It was black and silent. It had no sound, no light, but it was watching. It sent a signal. "The girl has activated a memory device. Location confirmed miles away in the forest." A hidden ship received the signal. The commander stood tall. He turned to his team. "Prepare to move. She must be taken back alive or broken back in the garage." Sarah looked at the sky. She felt it. She knew they were coming, and this time she would not go without a fight. The night returned with heavy silence, as if the world was holding its breath. Clouds moved slowly over the moon, hiding its light again and again, like curtains, opening and closing on a dark stage. Inside the small garage, Sarah stood still with her hand stretched toward the air. A broken wrench floated above her palm, spinning slowly like it had lost all weight. Her eyes were focused, but her mind was far away. Jake stood near the table, watching without words. He did not want to disturb her. He had seen the glow. He had seen the objects rise and fall. It was not a trick, not a game. It was real. Sarah lowered her hand, and the wrench dropped to the floor. With a soft sound, she looked tired but stronger. Her face was still marked with pain, but her eyes were changing. They no longer looked like the eyes of a frightened child. They now held something new, purpose, power. She touched the metal device again, and it hummed with life. The symbols on its side blinked in a pattern. She opened the back panel and pulled out a crystal glowing with soft blue light. She placed it on the ground between them. It pulsed like a heartbeat. She pointed at it, then pointed at her chest, then pointed at the stars drawn in the notebook. Jake slowly understood. This crystal was not just a power source. It was part of her. It was something from her world, something that connected to her very being. Maybe it was the key thing they had feared. Sarah sat down and closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. The crystal began to float. Tiny sparks moved around it like fireflies. Jake stepped back. He had never seen anything like this. Not in books, not in movies, not in dreams. Light from the crystal grew brighter, then softer, then brighter again. Then it stopped. Sarah opened her eyes, and they glowed faint blue. She stood slowly, her body steady, her hands no longer shaking. She walked to the table and picked up a small gear. Without touching it, she turned her palm. The gear floated and spun in the air. She moved her fingers. The gear changed direction. Jake clapped once with joy. He smiled. "You did it. You are getting stronger." Sarah smiled back, but then her face grew serious. Again, she pointed at the broken capsule part in the corner, then at the crystal, then at the sky. Jake looked up through the garage window. The sky was dark but peaceful. He looked back at her. She pointed again. Then she made a sign with her hands and was circle. Then she broke it apart. Jake took the notebook and quickly drew a ship, a planet, a broken connection. Sarah nodded. They had sent her away. They had broken the link between her and her power. Now the crystal was fixing it. But fixing it also sent a signal, and now they were coming. She walked outside slowly with Jake following behind. The air was cool and filled with sounds of the night. Owls, insects, wind through the trees. But Sarah was not listening to Earth. She was feeling the sky. She raised her hand, closed her eyes, and whispered a word in her language. The wind around them shifted. It swirled, leaves rose from the ground and danced around her feet. The air seemed to listen. Jake could feel it, a pull, a quiet power, not angry, not loud. Deep and alive. Suddenly, the sky above them flickered for just a second. A small dark shape moved between the clouds, quick, almost invisible. Sarah opened her eyes and turned to Jake. She placed her hand on his chest, then she pointed to the house, then to the forest. Jake understood. They were here, not many, but watching, maybe testing. He ran inside and brought out a flashlight and an old backpack. He threw in tools, water, snacks, and the notebook. Sarah took the crystal and placed it inside a small pouch she had made from an old cloth. They left the garage, moved through the backyard, and stepped into the woods. Trees stood tall like guards in the darkness. Branches cracked under their feet. But Sarah moved like wind, sure. After some distance, they stopped near a small cave Jake used to hide in as a child. He cleared the entrance and they stepped inside. Cold air greeted them, but it was quiet, safe for no. Sarah sat and placed the crystal in the center. She held her hands above it. It began to float again. She whispered another word. A small image appeared in the air, a memory, this time not sad, this time full of joy. A young Sarah floating in a room with soft lights, other children laughing, a teacher clapping. Then it changed, guards entering, children crying. The lights turned red. The image ended. Sarah looked down. Jake placed his hand on her shoulder. "You are not alone anymore." Outside the cave, a red light blinked once behind the trees, then vanished. The wind moved faster through the trees, as if the forest itself knew something was coming. The leaves whispered warnings. The night had changed. It no longer felt still. It no longer felt safe inside the cave. Jake sat beside Sarah with his eyes fixed on the crystal. It no longer floated. It rested now, dim but steady, like a heart that had finished its cry. Sarah looked calm, but her body was tense. She was listening, not with her ears, but with her mind. Suddenly, she stood and grabbed Jake's arm. She pulled him toward the cave entrance. He tried to ask why. She pointed to the sky, then placed 2 fingers over her lips. Jake understood silence. They were being watched. They stepped outside and began moving through the forest. No flashlights, no noise, only the moon guiding their path. Branches scratched their arms, but they kept going. Sarah moved with purpose. Jake followed with trust behind them. The cave shook for a moment. A shadow passed over it. A drone-like machine lowered itself from the sky. Its red eye blinked once it scanned. The cave empty, then it rose and vanished far above the forest in the clouds. A ship waited, dark and sharp, like a knife hidden in smoke. Inside the ship a figure stood tall with arms crossed. The commander of the hunt. He looked at the screen showing 2 heat signals moving fast through the woods. He raised one hand. Send the scouts. Do not lose hair. In the forest Jake and Sarah reached an open field. She stopped. She looked around. Then she pointed to the edge where a line of old train tracks ran. Through the grass Jake nodded. He knew this place. It led to the outskirts, to the hills, to safety. They ran across the field, their steps quiet but fast. Then a sound came, low and strange like metal breathing. Jake turned. He saw lights in the trees. 3 shapes, black, floating, coming closer. Sarah looked back, her eyes sharp. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small round object. She pressed it. The object opened like a flower and released a blue wave. The machine stopped just for a second, then continued faster. Now angrier, Jake and Sarah reached the tracks and followed them. The machines followed above, their red lights cutting through the night. Sarah stopped again and held out her hands. The air around them pulsed. The machines jerked. One of them fell to the ground like a stone. The others slowed. Jake grabbed her hand. Come on, we need to move, eh? Ran again, hearts racing, breath short. Behind them fire burst in the trees. One machine exploded. The forest began to burn from the sky. The commander watched, his voice calm but cold. She is learning fast. Prepare the net ahead. The tracks led to an old tunnel, dark, empty. Jake knew it had no other exit, but maybe it could hide them. They stepped inside. The sound of chasing machines faded behind them. Inside the tunnel their footsteps echoed. Sarah touched the walls. She whispered. The crystal began to glow again. Soft light filled the tunnel. Jake saw her eyes. They were not afraid. They were ready. Behind them a loud sound shook the tunnel. A wave of energy hit the entrance. The wall cracked. Dust fell from above. Jake pulled Sarah deeper into the tunnel. He looked for anything, any path, any hole. Then he saw a small gap in the wall. They crawled through it and reached a lower tunnel, old, wet, unknown. They followed it, step by step, until the light behind them was gone. Only the glow of the crystal showed the way. Minutes passed like hours. Then a light appeared ahead. Not red, not blue, but yellow, soft, human. They stepped out into a storage room filled with boxes, old tools, train parts. An old man looked at them with wide eyes. Jake spoke quickly. Please, we need to hide. Please do not ask. The man nodded slowly and pointed to a hatch in the floor. They climbed down into a dark space with stone walls and pipes. Safe for now. Silent again. Sarah sat on the floor, holding the crystal in her hands. It flickered. It was tired like her. Jake placed his jacket over her. He sat beside her and whispered, You are not alone. They cannot take you. We will keep running. We will find a way. Above them, the commander's ship hovered in the sky. Its scanners moved across the city. Its lights searched the streets, but the signal was gone. Trail was lost inside the dark hideout. Sarah closed her eyes. She could still feel them, but she could also feel something else, a memory, a voice from her past, telling her she was more than what they said, telling her to rise, and this time, she would. Listen, the morning sky was gray and heavy with clouds. Wind moved through the broken streets like a quiet warning. The city was still asleep, but deep beneath the old train station something had awakened. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at the small, flickering crystal in her hand. Its glow was weak but alive. It was still trying. Just like her. Jake sat across from her, leaning against a cold pipe. His eyes were half closed, but his mind stayed alert. He had not slept much. His ears kept listening for sounds above. The ship, the machines, the hunter Sarah stood slowly and stretched her arms. The air around her shifted slightly. A gentle pulse moved through the space. Jake opened his eyes and watched. She looked different, her steps no longer weak. Her shoulders no longer low. Something inside her had changed. She walked to the wall and placed her hand on the stone. The wall warmed under her touch. The crystal floated out of her palm and began to spin slowly in the air. Small sparks formed a circle around it. Symbols appeared, symbols not from Earth. They moved like water around her. Jake stood and walked closer. "What are you doing?" Sarah looked at him, then pointed to the ceiling, then to her heart, then to the symbols. He understood. She was reaching out, not to the ship, not to her enemies, but to something older, something hidden, something that belonged to her blood, her ancestors, the forgotten power of her people. The symbols formed a large shape in the air, a map, stars, planets, a path. She touched one point. It glowed brighter than the rest. She looked at Jake. He nodded. It was time to stop running, time to stand outside. The old man returned to the room above. He looked at the hatch, then at the street. He saw shadows moving, dark shapes. Fast and silent, he rushed to the window and pulled down the blinds. The ship was near, hovering above buildings, its lights scanning the ground. The hunters had arrived. Sarah felt it. She took a deep breath and placed the crystal back inside her pouch. She raised both hands. Energy swirled around her. Jake watched in awe as small objects in the room began to lift. Screws, wires, dust, all spinning. She closed her hands and everything dropped. But her body now glowed faint silver. Her eyes burned with blue fire. Jake looked at her and knew she was ready. The hatch opened and the old man called down, "They are here. They are searching." Sarah climbed up first. Jake followed. They stepped into the light of day with steady hearts. The street was empty, but above them 3 black machines floated silently, their red lights blinking. The middle one turned and aimed at them. Sarah stepped forward. She raised one hand. A pulse of blue light shot from her palm and hit the machine. It stopped midair and crashed to the ground. The others backed away for a second, then charged. Jake grabbed a metal rod and stood beside her. The machines flew low and fired. Small beams of red light struck the road. Explosions followed. Dust rose. Sarah moved her hands in wide circles. A barrier of light formed in front of them. The beams hit it but bounced off. Jake stared with wide eyes. He had never seen anything like this. She stepped out from behind the barrier and faced the machines. She pointed to the sky and then slammed her hands together. A wave of energy burst out like a silent scream. Both machines froze. Their lights flickered. They fell to the ground in pieces. Street became quiet again. Only the wind moved. Jake lowered the rod and smiled. "You did it. You stopped them." Sarah turned to him. She did not smile. She pointed to the ship in the distance. The real enemy was still waiting. That night they returned to the Junkyard, the place where it had all begun. The capsule still sat half buried, silent and cold. Sarah walked to it and placed her hand on the shell. The crystal floated out again. This time it sank into the capsule. Lights came on. The hatch opened. Inside a message played. A voice, female, strong. "You were born under the wrong star. You were never meant to survive. You were a danger to the order." This was the voice of the council, the ones who had thrown her away. Sarah stood still and listened. Then she erased the message with a single touch. She looked at Jake. No more running, no more hiding. They worked together through the night, fixing machines, building traps, preparing the field. They were not soldiers, not warriors, but they were determined. By morning, the sky above the Junkyard changed again. The ship arrived larger than before. It hovered silently. Watching inside the ship, the commander looked at the screen. He saw her standing in the open, waiting. He spoke to his team. "Bring her in, break anything that stands in the way." And so the final hunt began, but this time the prey was ready. The air stood still as if time itself waited for what was about to happen. The Junkyard was no longer silent. It was ready. Every broken machine, every pile of metal, every corner of dust now had purpose. Sarah stood in the center with her hair blowing like silver fire. Her hands glowed with the soft light of the crystal, her eyes calm but focused. She had waited long enough. She was done being the one who runs. She was done being the one who hides. Jake stood beside her, holding the control to one of the traps they had built. His heart beat fast, but he did not move back. He was not the hero, but he had stood with one above them. The dark ship circled low. Its shadow touched the earth like a warning. Inside the ship, the commander watched the screen. She stands in the open. She dares to resist. He raised his hand and gave the signal. The ship released a group of machines. 6 black hunters, fast, silent, armed. They moved through the sky like knives. They circled Sarah from above. One by one, they lowered to the ground. Jake stepped back, but Sarah stayed still. The lead machine spoke, its voice dry and empty. "Sarah of Sector Thalos, you are ordered to surrender. Return to custody. This world is not your." Sarah raised her hand. She pointed at the sky, then placed that hand on her heart. Her voice clear and strong. "I choose this world. I choose my path." The machines prepared to strike. Jake pressed the first button. A hidden panel of junk exploded to the left. One machine fell. Sarah moved fast. Her hands drew circles in the air. Light followed her fingers. A shield formed and blocked a red beam from the right. Jake ran to the next trap. Metal arms sprang from the ground and grabbed another machine. Sparks flew. The machine screamed, then silence. Sarah jumped onto a pile of broken cars and raised both arms. The crystal inside her chest glowed brighter than ever before. She shouted one word in her language. The ground beneath her pulsed. The sky above her cracked with energy. The last 2 machines flew straight at her. She closed her fists. A burst of light surrounded her. The machines hit it and shattered like glass. Smoke filled the air. Flames danced in the corners of the junkyard. Jake dropped to one knee and caught his breath. Above them, the commander stared at the screen. He was not afraid, he was furious. He left the control room and stepped into a chamber. There stood a suit, a weapon built for war. He entered it. The ship lowered. The ground shook. Metal scraped metal from the ship. Commander stepped out, 10 feet tall, armored, armed, his voice louder now. "You are nothing. You were made to follow, not lead. You are a mystic." Sarah stepped forward. She did not run. She did not shake. "I am not a mistake. I am not broken. I was thrown away, but I rose." The commander charged at her. Jake shouted, "Watch out." Sarah raised both arms. Her power lit the ground beneath her feet. The force of the hit pushed her back, but she held her place. They fought across the yard, light against metal, speed against strength. Jake tried to help. He threw tools, set off traps, but the commander kept coming. Sarah's body glowed brighter with each strike. The crystal pulsed faster, then suddenly silence. She stood still. Her hands lowered, her eyes closed. The commander raised his arm to strike. Then Sarah opened her eyes. The crystal inside her exploded with light. A wave of pure energy shot out in all directions. The commander flew back and crashed into the ship. The walls of the ship cracked, lights died, the engines failed. Sarah walked forward. She stopped in front of him. He reached for his weapon. She placed her hand on it, and it melted. He looked at her. For the first time he looked afraid. "Return to your world. Tell them we are not trash. We are not mistakes. We rise." The commander lowered his head. He stepped back into the ship. It rose slowly, broken, burning, defeated. The sky cleared. The stars returned. Sarah turned to Jake. She smiled. For the first time, a full smile. Jake walked to her. "So what?" No. Sarah looked up, then at the capsule, then at the earth. "I stay." Jake nodded. He offered her his hand. She took it. Together, they walked away from the junkyard, from the fight, from the fear. She was not just the girl who fell from the sky. She was the one who chose to rise.